Welcome back to the Academy Table. I'm Renee De Silva, CEO of the Academy and your host, and I am happy to have you back with us again. In the last few weeks, we've spent time with our guests discussing experiences from different angles: finance, culture, consumer engagement, the digital front door. So this next episode feels like the perfect place to go next, as I've had the pleasure of speaking and learning from my good friend, Sonia Rhodes. For 20 years, she has been a leading voice in healthcare experience design, and she's now the CEO and founder of the Experience Lab. As you'll hear, she works with organizations to apply what she calls best principles to create memorable experiences for patients and team members alike. It's hard to choose just a few highlights, but I suggest paying attention to these three. First, the nature of experience design is both hard work and heart work. Listen to how she challenges leaders to design with their heart instead of just their head. Next, and relatedly, pay attention to how Sonia defines good experiences. They come from the memories we take with us and the emotions and feelings those memories evoke. And lastly, I love how Sonia has centered the lens of racial justice and equity into her work, not as a thing, but as a way to do all things, and a requirement for all of us as leaders to start by learning on our own to then drive the ongoing work. So with that, let's head to the table. I am so delighted to have my friend first and colleague, Sonia Rhodes, join me at the table. Sonia, thank you so much for joining. I'm really happy to have you here today.
Renee, it's a delight. Thank you for welcoming me to your table.
So I want to start in the way that we would start a conversation if we were having a cup of tea or a glass of wine, which is something that I feel like is classic to how you think and how you try to build intention into all the various moments, which is a reflection. So before we get started and we just take a moment to arrive, would you take us through a reflection that you'd be comfortable sharing?
Sure. First of all, that idea, right, that a reflection gives us exactly what you just described, that pause, that moment to set aside everything that we might have brought to this moment or this meeting or this conversation and focus on that topic or purpose right here in front of us. And so, okay, so as we think about reflection for today and this conversation, I wonder, if we can think big about this moment in our industry and in our world and what that's sort of calling for us. And so I think about one of my wonderful mentors, Margaret Heffernan, leadership expert extraordinaire, shared with me early in the pandemic, week 1, as we were kind of finding our way. And she said that because none of us have been here before, all we can do is experiment. And I love that idea that there isn't an answer, right? That this is unknown, uncharted territory. And so it is upon all of us to experiment every day with that new possibility and the future we want to create together.
I think that's right. And if we just reflect on maybe where we find ourselves today, in some ways we feel like we've been here before as it relates to just how our healthcare caregivers are navigating through responding to the pandemic. And in particular, this notion of we are in this cycle of both breaking and healing and finding ways to come out of that with a new maybe possibility of how we think about healthcare moving forward. So talk to me a little bit about the partners that you work with through the work that you're doing at the Experience Lab. What does it look like to help an organization heal?
That's a great question. And what I really love, Renee, is your pairing, right, of the breaking and healing, and that they aren't two phases right now, that they're really a cycle, like an everyday cycle, because there is a breaking that's happening and a healing that we have to be working on simultaneously, not sort of waiting for the breaking to be over, for the healing to begin. Might have felt different 18 months ago, might have felt like we would have had some phases, but now that's all together. And so healing is the topic of focus, the priority of action in organizations that are passionately committed to transforming the experience they create inside and outside of their organizations. And that definition of healing is transforming too. So sort of from this, originally this big planned, how will we heal, to now this micro, moment by moment, building in of how we heal together, how we create a brave and safe space for people to share their heart, their trauma, their story, to be heard, a way to equip leaders in new ways for being able to be there for their team members in ways they never could have imagined they needed to, right? Far beyond the workplace needs, the family needs, their psychological, emotional, and physical needs, all of those things that are coming in, and how we now build that in to how we do what we do every day is really the topic and the area of focus for our team at this time.
Yes. Let me share with you, that resonates with me so deeply. I had the privilege of being part of a session that Dr. Mark Rosenberg and Becca Hawkins with Providence, they lead their compassionate care team, hosted recently, and it was on this topic. And so they asked the group to share one or two sentences that described a time when they fell short of their expectations for themselves. And they asked the other half of the group to then sort of say, show up for what you just heard from your coworkers, and witnessing that moment of brave, safe space, creating a moment to be heard was really powerful. And it was things like, I failed to lead, listen, and learn. Instead, I withdrew to survive. And then you heard a colleague whom they didn't necessarily know all that well say, your strength is in your caring. You are leading and acknowledging your weakness. It was a really powerful moment that I think you could feel the heaviness in the room lift a bit. So I imagine that's a bit about what you're seeing too in the work that you have underway.
Yeah, you kind of gave me just a little bit of chills thinking about that, right? These beautiful people being there for each other in that way, the vulnerability of talking about that time when a person felt like they felt short of their own expectations, and others providing that real mirror to them of who they are. And I think that, Renee, what you've just described is really the work and the opportunity right now for organizations is to make sure that the pairing of this idea and this reality of breaking, of PTSD, of trauma, of exhaustion, of depletion, of what feels like isolation for so many people, because they just feel like maybe they're the only ones that are feeling this way. But really the flip to that, the pair to that helps us move forward is that appreciative lens that you just described, right? How do we talk about both ourselves and for others, those moments of pride, of the times that we came together, the way that we rose up and innovated and collaborated like never before. I mean, those are the shining eyes that I see of the organizations that we talk to every day when leaders tell us about how extraordinarily proud they are of their teams. I think that time and energy needs to be spent too, right? Because that is healing in and of itself, to be able to recognize the good with the very, very difficult.
That's right. And you do a lot in Words Matter, and you do a lot to really reframe perspective, right? So how do we think about humanizing healthcare? Instead of mitigating burnout, what if we designed for joy and meaning and connection? So how do you think about applying that mindset moving forward?
I appreciate you bring that up. And we are definitely folks across time who believe that burnout has become a phrase that actually, if we meet with young learners, first and second year medical students all the time, and they're already using that word, burnout. I'm like, well, where did you learn that? How did that happen in year one or year two that we're already describing ourselves as burned out? And they say, well, there isn't a time that we don't hear that about our industry, from our mentors, about the organization, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sort of built in. And we think a lot about how to unbuild that, right? How do we build in something else, which is that ability we absolutely can design organizations for and with joy. There is a joyfulness to creating something that's never been created before. There is a joyfulness that comes with solving these intractable problems and challenges. And we do talk to folks who have been in the most difficult times of their lives these last 18 months, but also can speak with a joie de vivre of what it meant to do something so powerfully impactful, right? For other people, for their colleagues, for their patients, for their communities. And so if we flip that lens and instead of just every day trying to figure out how to eradicate burnout, but instead to show up in a way that we're here to design for joy, to design for healing, design for whatever that might be, that is not necessarily just taking us kind of in the downward spiral to burnout.
And so I guess for leaders who can show up with that lens of being able to reframe the perspective, it comes from work that they've probably done over time, right? To allow them maybe to have the internal capacity to apply that lens. I know this notion of a big E experience, and I'm going to ask you to define it in a moment, is something that you really have thought about for most of your career, both of the launching of the Experience Lab, which is the work that you do now, and then at Sharp before that. Let's just zoom out a bit and talk to me about how do you think about experience? Just define that term holistically before we unpack this. How do you then redesign for joy?
Yes. So when we think about experience, we pull our camera as far back as possible, right? Pull the lens back, look at the big canvas of possibility when it comes to the experience in healthcare. And we know that while our end goal, the reason we're here is to create that meaningful and memorable experience for patients and their loved ones, that the only way we can get there is to begin first on the inside with the experience we create for and with each other. And so we call it big E experience, capital E experience, underline E experience, because this is the experience of everyone, because everyone's experience matters in our caring spaces and places. And then my own trajectory and real world experience in this space for over 20 years is that we really can't create a better experience for our patients if we do not start first on creating a better experience for the people who are caring every day in our places and spaces.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, this notion of designing from the inside out, and maybe a bit counterintuitive at times. You certainly hear organizations talk about the customer journey or the patient journey, but where you're going is, if you haven't really thought about that for the people who are daily caregiving, and that's everyone, physicians, nurses, environmental services folks, people who are doing wayfinding at across healthcare, it really becomes hard to unlock the ladder.
And the work of creating whatever that is, a better experience, quality, the safety that we're working on, all of the to-dos that get put into what I call it kind of the metaphorical backpack of our face-to-face team members starts to get really heavy. And it's just one more thing, right? And more things that are right there, unless we begin with them. And not only with them in terms of like, how do we create this wonderful experience for the people who work here, but how do we enlist and equip and engage those people as the architects of that experience? This is not just a coming in and doing something for folks, right? It's how do we do something with and equip people to create that culture and that experience that does enliven them, that does get them up in the morning saying, yes, I get to do this. And then that makes it possible for those folks to then be able to tap into their own wisdom and dream and design an even better experience for their patients and their loved ones. I think about this time, right? How much we've learned, how much we've had to do in really difficult circumstances where no loved ones could be with us, or where folks have been going through such trauma. I think that the wisdom of our teams in healthcare right now is extraordinary, and we have a responsibility to tap into that now to create that better future.
So you describe the Experience Lab as an incubator and accelerator of action. And when you think about the organizations that want to be on that journey with you, what are they coming to you with in terms of how would they articulate the problem that they're trying to solve at a really high level?
That's a great question. I think when we created the Experience Lab, we probably thought there would be a certain kind of organization, or maybe this really wonderful breadth of organizations that come in wanting to lead the way for experience. And what's been really fascinating as we look back now, 5 years in the Experience Lab, that the organizations that tend to invest their time and energy in creating their experience are often really high performing organizations, right? That they aren't really trying to solve this unsolvable problem. They're trying to elevate the best of their organization in a cohesive, orchestrated, human way. And so they all come at it from a different perspective. Some organizations are looking at this from that team member engagement, right? We want a place where everybody every day feels like they wouldn't want to work anywhere else. So they'll come to us with that. We've come this far, but we know there's so much more we can do. We don't really understand that idea that we can design that into the future. But then others come with that physician lens, that provider lens, this opportunity to be a place that is exactly where folks want to practice and bring their expertise. And then some come at it definitely very much from that consumer and patient centricity. And our job is to make sure that we're always weaving the three together. But so regardless of that initial focus, there's an opportunity to weave all of that together.
Okay, so let's make that real a bit. Can you talk a little bit about the key principles of an experience journey as you see them?
Absolutely. In fact, in our work in the Experience Lab, we use 4 experience themes to guide all aspects of our work: leading, looking, living, and loving. And there are 12 associated experience principles that align to those themes. So leading is where we understand that transforming experience is the legacy work of leaders, and really creating a better experience has to start with our leaders. Looking is where we use our eyes and all of our senses to learn to see and feel what is rarely noticed. It's where we get to make the invisible visible. Look, and then living is where we are operationalizing our experience. How do we bring that experience to life? How are we being the change we wish to see in every moment? And then loving, how we can really focus on that wonderful idea that work is love made visible, how we wholeheartedly design our culture and our organizations for and with joy, so that we can be a place where folks fall back in love with their work every day. So those kind of big thematics and the principles are what help us design the kind of experience that people desire and deserve. The wonderful Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore, who wrote the book, The Experience Economy, they've been my dear friends and mentors since the minute one of my journey many, many years ago, helped the world and the business world understand that the hallmark of an experience is the memory we take with us. And I think that's really important, right? When you think about all the experiences in your life, it's those memories that define that experience. So that tells us in our industry that yes, we're healthcare workers and leaders, but we're also memory makers, because these are memories in our places and spaces that have the potential to last a lifetime. And so it's that idea of making memories, being part of someone's lasting memories, that helps us also understand that to design our experiences, we have to design to a clear intention. What do we want that experience to be? And to get to what do we want that experience to be, we have to ask ourselves this question. And I think sometimes this is maybe that missing piece, which is, how do we want our experience to feel?
It's really powerful. So when you said earlier, this notion of what we're all after is a cohesive, orchestrated human experience, the way that you get there is through asking this question of, how do we want to remember this? And I think all of us go back to whether it was a experience that makes us happy and full of joy, or one that have the counter impact, that is what sticks with you, right? That's what kind of gets imprinted on your core.
And then people talk in that feeling space, right? Difficult things happen in our healthcare systems every day. And now 10x every day, difficult things are happening in our organizations. But people can feel that they were tended to and cared for and nurtured through the most difficult times of their experience. And those are the letters we get, right? When someone says, this was the worst day of my life, but you were there for me. So when we think about the feelings we want to impart through our experience, that's what helps us design for that. So when we say design to an intention, we've got to be clear about the experience that we want to create. And a lot of people will say, well, we want to create a better experience. And that's awesome. I mean, we all want the experience to get better every day, but better is not crisp in a way that anyone knows, well, what am I supposed to do for that, right? Like how do I get there? But if we say we want to create an experience that feels more connected, oh, well, I can do that. I want somebody to feel connected, or where people feel seen. Oh my gosh. Oh, well, if we want people to feel seen, here's what we would do, right? We want someone to feel that it was tender. Oh, tender. I can do tender, right? So then you can start to actually design for that feeling. And it changes everything.
It does. And it requires a level of vulnerability for leaders to show up and be comfortable getting out of their head and into their heart a bit. Like that's the work that you're trying to create a space for.
I love that you said that. We often say that experience design is hard work, but more importantly, it's heart work. It's absolutely heart work. It's also being this experimenting the way we started. It's being willing to experiment with things. We do not have to do things the way we've always done them. We do have to ask ourselves how things happened. More likely than not, the way our experiences come to life in our organizations were really not by design, experienced by design. It was experienced by default. This is how things kind of came together. And then we acquired this thing, and then we moved the lab over here. And so people have to walk back and forth, whatever that is, right? That wasn't by design. That was by default. And so we have an opportunity, and I would say a responsibility, to begin to create experiences by design with intention for our organizations.
So recognizing that you can find exemplars. Oftentimes these exemplars aren't resident in healthcare. Where do you look for inspiration? So if you take these principles and these themes, what are some out of industry exemplars that come to mind for you in terms of having information, knowledge that you try to tap into?
Okay, so I love that. One of the things I think that's really important, and sometimes people give us, the big eyebrow when we say that the Experience Lab is a best principle organization, meaning that we help other organizations with the principles of experience design. And ultimately, we'll help you create your own best practices, but we're not a best practice organization. We're not going to tell you exactly what you should do in this place or space or moment. We're going to equip you to be able to design that in a way that's just right for you. But a principle, like it's important for us, I think, to just punch in on the distinction. A principle is a guiding and abiding truth. And that's what helps us go outside of our industry to other industries for learning. We don't have to only look inside our organizations or our industries for the practices that are working. So best practice, right? That's a specific action or an example, but that asks us to do what others have done. Super important in a lot of our clinical work, but not so important in our experience work, because I would just say that I don't think that really there are that many best practices yet in experience in our industry. I think it's still nascent and building, and that we're creating the capacity to have those best practices. So those principles, if we only look inside, very insular, we're not going to imagine a new future of healthcare. So going outside is really built in to how we do what we do in the Experience Lab. We call the work inside out, but it's also very outside in. And we can go out to, and often do, and in fact, just last week did with leaders of a large multi-state healthcare system, where we look at retail and hospitality and exemplars in the arts to be able to help us understand a principle at play. And then we help those folks extract, adapt, and apply that principle uniquely into their own organization. So let me see if I can give you just a super simple example. So we can think about Apple, right? Apple, this sort of ubiquitous brand technology sort of built into so many people's lives. But what can we learn from a principle at play at Apple? And when I think about the Apple experience in their physical places and what they once called stores, you can look at what we would kind of call anyone everywhere. That Apple doesn't create particular places for particular things. There's no checkout in the Apple store experience. Checkout can happen with anyone everywhere. Apple also has this beautiful principle at play, which helps us understand it's not always what the experience is, but it's what it's not, what they've taken away, because sometimes we just keep thinking we have to add, when in fact, what we need to do is really take away for a streamlined, simplified, elegant experience. And if you look in an Apple store, the one thing when we ask people to look, and we do a lot of looking, that they realize is missing with hundreds of devices in those places and spaces there are no cords. Nothing's plugged in and hanging down underneath those tables because the power is built into the legs. They've figured out a way to build that in, and so there's no distraction from their experience.
As you were talking, I'm visualizing that, and then I'm also thinking of one that I observed just this week too, which is the hospitality industry has been through a reckoning the last 18 months, and they are rebooting and reimagining how they come back. And one thing that I've appreciated from the partners that the Academy works with when we are hosting events, and we're doing that safely, is this principle of wanting to get it right. And I heard that sentiment echoed recently when we were hosting an event, this notion of, I don't have all the answers, but I really want to get this right. And I don't think the woman knew that certainly didn't know my role and didn't know that I could hear her conversation, but I thought that was really powerful when no one's watching, when we weren't asking her any questions. It was like just this own drive for wanting to get it right and being willing to go that extra mile to do that. I thought that was a great principle in action.
I love that. And hospitality has so much that we can learn and glean and extract and adapt and apply. And I think of some of the classics in our hospitality realm that have helped us understand really deeply the power of the principle of personalization, which in the Experience Lab, we spend a lot of time helping organizations create experiences that feel more personal, like it was just for me, but do that en masse, right? How do we create mass personalization? And there's beautiful ways to do that, to build into our systems and processes. And so a classic example of personalization is the Ritz-Carlton, who have done such an incredible job of what we call creating a remembering system, right? They just simply remember interactions, conversations, preferences, choices of their customers, of their guests, and then they do something with what they remember. So there's so much that we can learn just from that principle of observing or asking, remembering, and then doing something with what we've discovered that we can use right in our own organizations. We know a lot. We have multi-million-dollar remembering systems called EHRs, and we can do something to remember some of those personal attributes as well.
That's right. Unleashing them as a system of engagement, not just one of a transactional record. I think that's really powerful. So let me take us in a little bit of a different direction. And you and I have had a number of personal off the mic conversations around this, but the other reckoning in the last 18 months has been around social justice and having much more of a forward-leaning conversation around race, and not just working to not just sort of acknowledging our country's history with race, but also being actively anti-racist. And so I wonder how you've infused this lens of equity and inclusion through all the work that you have underway at the Experience Lab.
Really, isn't it interesting how everything that happens in our world is happening in healthcare too, right? That we can't assume that our need to be anti-racist is happening outside of the work that we do in healthcare. And so you're right. It has been an obsession built into our everyday learning in the organization. I think the most important thing is for me to say that we are by no means experts in anti-racism, although we are passionate passionate students. And so for us last year, that reckoning was another really big wake up that we have an opportunity to learn and grow, and then to make sure that learning and growth is infused into everything we do. So just like experience for us, that started as inside work, as anti-racism does always begin as inside work, each individual and an organization. So as an organization, we committed to deep anti-racism learning, created an anti-racism learning circle, followed the circle way, a method by which everyone owns the learning, the growth, and the development, and then kind of adapted and adopted a weekly curricula that helps us grow as humans, as a business, and then also grow that into this realm of experience in our organization. We are by no means perfect, but we are working really hard every day to build that in. And I think there's a lot, I'm sure you're spending time in this space too, the equity, diversity, and inclusion, really important work that's happening in our organization. What we're really coming more clear to, and I think our organizations that we partner with are as well, is that can't be separate from everything else, right? Equity, diversity, and inclusion, that's not a separate thing. It doesn't happen in a silo. It's not over here when times are good, or we have the money, or we have the time, or we've hired in the perfect consultant, right? That can't be our approach. It's got to be built into how we do what we do. And that's experience, right? When we talk about organizations who distinguish themselves by the experience they create, it's because experience is everything they do. It's the way in which they do everything. So when I think about experience and anti-racism, experience is anti-racism, right? Experience is equity, diversity, and inclusion, but experience is also quality and safety. Experience is creating that great place to work. Experience is hospitality and human connection. And so this is the work of bringing that all together, braiding it in so that these are then our design tools and our decision filters. We can't be making decisions, whether that's operating decisions or technology decisions or partner decisions, whatever it might be, without using our anti-racism lens and filter, without using our experience and feeling lens and filter, just the same way we would use our quality or our financial filters.
So powerful. And I think I will attribute this to you. I've heard you say in the past that experience is not a thing. It's the way that we do all things. And when I've talked about, as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I use that same mantra. It's not a thing. It's the way that we do all things. It's the lens by which we evaluate, the way that we show up, the way that we lead, what we reward. And so I think you're right. These things are linked. And I think it's been heartening for me to see just the level of conversation and eagerness for us to all do the work that we need to do to show up more effectively in that capacity.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, I want to say thank you to you for shining such a bright and important light and creating that brave and safe space for these conversations for leaders in our industry and being such a great role model for that. I worry that the trauma of our times, which is so complex and compounded, when you think back just over 18 months of every single thing that we've been learning and reckoning with, I love your word reckoning, I don't want anything to get lost, right? So how do we make sure that we don't let that anti-racism, vital, important work at the heart of creating the kind of healthcare that we know needs to be created? How do we not let that get lost in this everything else that unfortunately is just getting more challenging every day? So I appreciate you keeping that at the forefront. I think we all have important work to do to not let us kind of take that foot off the gas when it comes to this.
Indeed. So one maybe additional thread to explore is the work that you have underway is so important, and it feels like needed more now than ever. But this is not work that you just started on. So can you just maybe take us back? We've been thinking about and zooming out, but just take us back. How did you arrive in this space of thinking about experience with just the level of clarity in which you convey it? How did you arrive at the work? Or how did the work find you?
Yeah, I'm so old. That's like a 3-week story, but I'll try to be clear on that. I've been officially leading some sort of experience in the industry for over 20 years now. And for me, it all sparked by a personal experience. My dad ended up in our flagship organization, a flagship hospital, and I got to see our experience through new eyes, not the eyes of the person I was at the time, the leader I was at the time, creating the front doors for our organizations. This is so long ago, creating our websites and doing marketing and telling the world the story and creating the nurse advice lines and information lines, just making it easy for people to access our experience. And then when I was in that experience, realizing that it was hard. It was traumatizing. It was not really designed for patients or their families, and I'm not saying it was great clinical care. My dad's 90 years old, still alive to this day, and they saved his life. And yet there was a lot in those 14 days in our own facility that I learned, and I became like passionately obsessed about this. And so I had the great honor to work with incredible visionary leaders who were, when given the opportunity to kind of look anew, we're like, yes, we should be doing something more and different. We decided that we didn't have the answers for the work, and that time there was no such thing as really consulting on this. And so we just went out and studied organizations outside of the industry. It took about 6 or 9 months to travel the country, a team of 10 of us executives kind of traveling and learning. That was really where we discovered, we thought we were going to go out and create a better patient experience. And that's what we were trying to study. How do you create this consumer centricity? And instead we discovered that we would never be able to do that unless we created a new kind of culture and experience. So I had the opportunity of a lifetime to be part of an incredible team setting the loftiest vision in the industry, we thought, to become the best healthcare system in the universe. And it felt kind of cheeky at the time, but it became this unbelievable heartbeat of our organization where 18,000 people every day were working together to create a new kind of experience. And that was hard work and heart work. And if you can believe it, next month is the 20th anniversary of the launch of the Sharp experience at Sharp Healthcare in San Diego. They really put experience at the forefront of our industry. They put that name and that word and that lexicon and that understanding into our industry, and they're still leading the way, which is really quite exciting.
That is powerful. I've gotten to know many of the Sharp leaders over time. I think, especially if you flash back 20 years ago, you all were ahead of your time. I said to your former colleague, Ann Pumpian, just last week that what's also notable about that is the way that she was the former CFO, the way that the finance team and the experience team, the rest of the executive team really came together to really forge something new. And I think that's heartwarming in terms of how enduring that focus has been.
Ann Pumpian is exquisite. And I went on a little gratitude tour to kind of reconnect with folks who meant so much to me in my life and my career. And when I sat with Ann for lunch one day a number of years ago, was able to really express this gratitude I had that really our ability to invest the time, energy, focus to align everything in our organization to the experience that we wanted to create for people. So much of that was because of her vision, her belief, her willingness to invest in a marathon and not a sprint, and understand that investment would pay off in immeasurable ways, which it has now. They have this 20-year study looking back, every single measure and metric that improved over those times. And it was rarely the metrics that we thought would get better first. Where our patient satisfaction will get better instantly. Well, no, it didn't. But our team member engagement transformed dramatically. That engagement meant that we reduced our turnover in half, and that turnover reduction opened up more funds for us to invest in the experience that we were creating for our patients. So quality and safety improved, donations to the organization improved. So that idea that experience can be everything, I have so much to thank Ann for believing in that and understanding investment in that way.
Absolutely. So maybe 2 final questions. The first is there an experience that you're just craving right now to just redesign, something that you observed is completely broken? I'm struck by your experience with your dad was one of the early maybe motivators for you to pay attention to this in a new way. So what's on your mind now? What do you see that you feel like really needs a lot of attention in terms of reimagining the experience for caregivers and patients?
Well, it's been an interesting year. I've spent 30 days at the bedside of a family member. I've had my own experiences on the other side of the sheets this year. And so I would just say we have an opportunity to continue to look at everything that we're doing, that there is so much more that we can do to create our experiences designed to the feelings we want to impart, but also designed to the feelings that people are bringing into those caring spaces and places, those fears, those hopes, those aspirations, that love of somebody. And I think that these difficult times have kind of made that harder. So that's kind of big picture. I think that, and then I have tiny little things and I have really big things. It's funny. We last week were spending some time. I have one personal mission, and this is just so silly and so tiny, but honestly, after 20 years, I just can't understand why we're still putting people's belongings in clear plastic bags. Nobody wants to carry their dad's underwear around in a clear plastic bag. Like, I don't get that. It's so simple, right? But that's such a good example, right? If we're still carrying people's underwear around in a clear plastic belonging bag, which kind of takes away our dignity, then what else are we missing?
All right. Final question. One that I ask all of our guests on the podcast, which is this notion of, for me, when I think about the Academy table, my intention was to create a space for dialogue and conversation, both voices that are known in healthcare, those that may be a little bit less known, because I do think so much of what we missed across these past 18 months has been that personal connection around a shared meal or a cup of tea or a glass of wine. So with that spirit in mind, if you could invite two people for a conversation at your table, who would they be and why?
Oh, that's so dreamy. And oh, how I miss gathering around a table. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I do always have leadership crushes. I don't know. Is that appropriate to share with you? I love it.
Yeah.
I just totally have leadership crushes. Now it's going to be hard for me to narrow it to two. Could I have three and then we'd be a table of four and it would be fine? I always want to pick a young leader, somebody who reminds us of what's possible, who is going to be shaping and creating the future. I have a leadership crush on Amanda Gorman, the extraordinary poet who has proven the power of words to catalyze a collective. I think we need someone like her right now who can help paint that picture of a brighter future in a way that people can see it and then want to be it. So I absolutely love her. And then there are two other leaders that I study, I watch, I follow. I don't know. Is that called stalking? I don't think so, but I think it's okay. It's from afar. I would love to have Jose Andre at the table. He is the founder of World Central Kitchen, and his ability to get things done, to not allow what is to stop what needs to be done from getting done is just incredible. Just last week, he, of course, is mobilized in Haiti. He's mobilized in Afghanistan. He and his team feed people. That deepest need for people to be nourished is something that he does in such an exquisite way. So I want to understand the way he orchestrates, the way he mobilizes. And I just love details. So I want to understand how he gets that done. And then the last person that I just lovingly observe and hopefully learn from, and I hope the world is learning from, is, and I might not say her name as well as I'm supposed to, but Jacinda Ardern. She's the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And to watch her as an exemplar of wholehearted leadership through these challenging times, lead her people, her country, her nation through this pandemic with such authenticity, believability, and partnership is something I think we can extract, adapt, and apply to our own organization. So I'd love that conversation with the three of them.
That would be a delightful gathering. That's perfect. Well, that's a good place to land. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to do this in person at some point soon. And thank you so much for all of your insights today.
Oh my gosh, Renee, you're the best. Thank you for doing what you do. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And I appreciate being here.
Thanks again for joining me at The Table. The Table is a podcast produced by the Health Management Academy. Make sure you catch future episodes by visiting our website, theacademytable.com, or by subscribing on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you have suggestions for topics or guests, I'd love to hear from you. Please drop me a note at renee@hmacademy.com. I look forward to talking with you soon.